The Atlantic hurricane season still has about 6 weeks left officially, but things are starting to cool off in the air and obviously in the water as well, and that's obviously good news. We bring in State Senator Tom Davis of Beaufort County to join us. The official hurricane season is still out there. All of us have already paid for it a lot with our homeowners premiums, which have gone up, really spiked this past year. I think most people understand why, but explain it a little further and what we can start to do about it.
Right. There are a couple of things. And first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate this chance to speak to your viewers. We have had homeowners insurance, flood insurance, wind insurance premiums spike in recent months. I mean, I've gotten a lot of calls from constituents in that regard.
I bet you have.
There are two things I think to be aware of here. The first thing is I am going to make sure that when insurance companies go to the Department of Insurance and seek a premium increase permission, I want to make sure that the losses that they're estimating and the losses that they're using to justify their premium increases are related to South Carolina losses. What I've seen in the past is insurance companies tend to lump in losses that also occur in Florida and North Carolina, for instance. And because of the nature of our geographic coastline, I mean, it's concave, a lot more hurricanes will hit and cause damage in Florida and in North Carolina than in South Carolina. And it's unfair for ratepayers in South Carolina or people paying premiums in South Carolina to pay losses that are associated with damage that are done in those other states. So that's the first thing I will make sure of, is making sure there's a correlation between the losses that are being claimed by insurance companies and whether or not they occurred in South Carolina.
Sure.
But speaking more broadly, there's something proactive that we can do to assist homeowners in controlling the spike in these premiums. South Carolina has a program called the Safe Homes Program, which was enacted back in 2007, back when I was the governor's chief of staff. And what that program does, it allows homeowners to make weatherization improvements to their homes, make it more storm resistant, more flood resistant, more wind resistant. And they can take a dollar for dollar tax credit against their state income tax for the cost of those weatherization repairs. So it puts them in a position to negotiate lower rates with the insurance companies. Now, the problem is, historically in South Carolina, we've only allocated about $5 or $6 million a year to pay for those tax credits. In order to make the program meaningful and available to more homeowners, we need to allocate more money in the state budget for those safe home tax credits. And that's something that I'll be working on in January. So those two things are proactive measures we can take to try to control those spiking homeowners insurance premium costs.
Okay. Next month, we'll probably talk a little more about state finances and how much money we might have to play with in the coming year. But I want to go back to something a little more local. Over the past week, the town council in Bluffton decided, I guess, apparently tired of waiting for the state, the town council enacted its own hate crimes law in Bluffton. How much impact that's going to have is obviously yet to be seen, but it does point up the fact that South Carolina and Wyoming are the only two states in the country that don't have a statewide hate crimes bill. Does it matter, and is it something you see on the horizon for South Carolina?
Well, first of all, it does matter. And anytime you see municipalities like Bluffton, and I believe Columbia and Charleston have done something
they
similar.
have too.
Every time you see municipalities take action in this regard, it reminds legislators in Columbia of what's important to their constituents. So I think it's important in that regard. And second of all, I think it's simply inexcusable that we don't have a hate crimes legislation in South Carolina. I mean, and people need to understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about instances where an existing crime is committed, when there's a murder or an assault or something of that nature, that if there is a component of hate involved or is motivated by hatred for somebody's sexual orientation or religion or race, that can be a sentence enhancement. Okay, it is not a separate crime. It is a factor that a judge can consider when deciding what sentence to impose if somebody commits an existing crime. And the thing of it is, we already have things like that in the South Carolina Code. They're called aggravating circumstances. In certain murder cases right now, if certain aggravating circumstances are involved, if there's a kidnapping, if a law enforcement officer is killed, those can be considered by a judge when determining whether or not to enhance the sentence. So this notion of having factors for a judge to consider when imposing a penalty is not something new. The only question is, why don't we have crimes that are motivated by hate as as aggravating circumstances for the judge to consider when imposing a penalty. I think it's entirely appropriate. I think that South Carolina needs to pass this legislation. I am working on my colleagues, as I have for the past several years, to get this across the finish line, and I'm optimistic that we can get it done in 2024.
All right, that's a good point to end it on. We appreciate the time, Senator, and look forward to talking to you next month. Maybe we'll start talking about revenues and money to spend for the state legislature in the coming year. Thanks so much again, State Senator Tom Davis.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be back with much more of the WHHI Daily News right after this.